On the morning of his 65th birthday, Earl Brennan walked into a regional Edward Jones office in Marshfield, Wisconsin, wearing the same canvas work pants he'd owned since 1998, and asked the advisor to print out his account balance. The advisor printed it. Then she printed it again, because she thought the machine had made a mistake. $4,217,000. Earl folded the paper into quarters, slid it into his wallet next to a receipt for a transmission filter, and walked back out to his truck. He had never employed a single person. He had never advertised beyond a magnet on his door. And for 32 years he had turned down every offer to franchise, partner, or expand the one-man plumbing operation he ran out of a converted detached garage on County Road K. To understand how Earl Brennan ended up with more money than the orthodontist 3 blocks over, you have to rewind to the spring of 1991, when Earl was 33 years old, freshly divorced, and working as a journeyman plumber for a mid-sized contracting outfit in Stevens Point. He'd been offered a foreman position that came with a $6,000 raise and the responsibility of managing 9 apprentices. He turned it down. 2 weeks later, he gave notice, took out a $4,000 loan against his pickup, bought a set of used rigid tools at an estate auction, and hung a hand-painted sign on his garage that read, simply, Brennan Plumbing, cash or check. No after-hours surcharge unless it's actually after hours. The local plumbing community thought he was finished. The conventional wisdom in 1991, just as it is today, was that the only way to make real money in the trades was to scale. Hire apprentices, bill them out at 3 times their wage, build a fleet, get on commercial contracts. Earl's old boss told him point blank he'd be back asking for his job within 18 months. Instead, Earl did something almost no one in his industry did. He sat down at his kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and calculated, line by line, what it actually cost to run a plumbing business versus what it cost to run Earl. The numbers stunned him. His old company was grossing nearly $2 million a year, but after payroll, workers' comp, vehicle insurance for a fleet of 7, office rent, a part-time bookkeeper, advertising in 3 regional phone books, and the owner's salary, the actual take-home for the man at the top was around $84,000. Earl figured out that if he worked alone, billed at a competitive but not cheap rate, and refused to take on anything that required a second pair of hands, he could clear nearly that much himself while working roughly half the hours. So that's what he did. He charged $75 an hour in 1991, which by 2023 had climbed to $140, always slightly below the big franchise outfits, but above the desperate part-timers. He took cash for emergency calls, which he defined as anything between 6 in the evening and 7 in the morning, and anything on a Sunday. Those calls carried a flat $200 minimum that climbed to $400 by the end of his career, and they were almost pure profit, because the customer in a flooding basement at 11 at night does not haggle. He kept his overhead brutally low. 1 truck replaced exactly twice in 32 years. No office, no secretary, no answering service. He answered his own phone, and if he was under a sink, it went to voicemail, and he called back within the hour. He carried liability insurance, the legally required minimum, and that was the entirety of his fixed monthly business expense outside of fuel and supplies. But the low overhead was only half the story, and frankly, the less interesting half. The thing that turned Earl Brennan from a comfortable small-town tradesman into a millionaire several times over was what he did with the money once it landed in his checking account. In 1993, 2 years into running his own shop, Earl read a paperback copy of John Bogle's book on index investing that he found at a library sale for 50 cents. He underlined passages with a carpenter's pencil, and he made a decision that he stuck to with almost religious discipline for the next 3 decades. Every single month, on the first business day, he transferred a fixed percentage of the previous month's revenue into a Vanguard account. He started at 15%. By 1998, he had pushed it to 25%. By 2005, with his house paid off and his expenses microscopic, he was funneling 40% of gross revenue straight into the total stock market index fund and the total bond market index fund in a roughly 80-20 split that he rebalanced once a year on the Saturday after Thanksgiving. He didn't time the market. He didn't pick stocks. When the dot-com bubble burst in 2000 and his account dropped by nearly a third, he kept buying. When the financial crisis hit in 2008 and his balance fell from just under 600,000 to a little over 380,000 in 6 months, he not only kept buying, he increased his monthly contribution because he'd had a strong year fixing burst pipes during a brutal Wisconsin winter. He told his sister, the only family member who ever asked about his finances, that he simply didn't look at the balance during downturns. He looked at it once a year in December, the same time he rebalanced. The rest of the year, the money went in and he went on with his life. Now, before we get to the part where his peers started to realize what he'd quietly pulled off, consider the stakes for a moment. Earl was not earning some extraordinary income. In his best year, 2019, he grossed $168,000. His average over 32 years was closer to $96,000. He was, by every external measure, a small-town tradesman driving a Ford F-250 with a cracked taillight. So how does a man with that income profile end up with a portfolio that, by the time he sat down in that Edward Jones office, had crossed $4 million? And more importantly, what did he refuse to do that everyone around him said yes to? The answer starts with the offers Earl turned down, because they tell you everything about why most tradesmen who out-earn him on paper end up broke. In 1997, a regional plumbing chain offered to buy his customer list and bring him on as a salaried lead technician at $72,000 a year plus benefits. He said no. In 2003, his cousin pitched him on opening a second location in Wausau, with the cousin running the new shop, and Earl as a silent partner putting up $60,000 in startup capital. He said no. In 2011, a private equity roll-up that was acquiring trades businesses across the upper Midwest offered him $320,000 for his business and a 3-year employment contract. He said no. Each one of those offers looked, on the surface, like more money. Each one of them would have, by Earl's own math, made him poorer. Here's why. The chain job in 1997 would have capped his income at $72,000 and stripped him of the ability to control his savings rate. The Walsall expansion would have required him to take on payroll, lease a second location, and, critically, pull capital out of his index funds to seed the business, breaking the compounding that was already doing most of the heavy lifting. The private equity buyout in 2011 looked like a windfall, but Earl ran the numbers and realized that his portfolio, at that point already past $900,000 and compounding at roughly 7% real returns, would generate more than $320,000 in growth alone within 4 years, while he continued earning his normal income on top. This is the part that almost no one talks about when they tell you to scale your business. Growth costs money. Growth costs time. Growth introduces risk, complexity, employees who quit, customers who sue, trucks that get rear-ended by uninsured drivers. Earl figured out, sometime in his late 30s, that he wasn't actually in the plumbing business. He was in the capital allocation business, and plumbing was just the engine that fed the allocator. Every hour he spent under a sink was an hour that produced cash, and that cash had exactly one job, which was to go buy shares of an index fund and never come back out until he was old. So what should you actually take from Earl Brennan's story if you're not a plumber and you have no intention of becoming one? 3 things, and they are specific. First, calculate your real take-home, not your gross. Sit down with a legal pad like Earl did and figure out what $1 of revenue actually puts in your pocket after every expense, tax, and hour of stress. If scaling cuts that number, scaling is making you poorer, no matter what the top line says. Second, automate a fixed percentage of every dollar that comes in and make that percentage uncomfortable. 15% is a floor, not a ceiling, and the discipline of moving it before you see it is worth more than any stock pick you'll ever make. Third, decide in advance, in writing, what you will do during the next market crash. Earl's rule was simple. He didn't look, and he didn't stop buying. Most people lose decades of compounding because they panic in a single afternoon. Write your rule down now while the sun is shining, because you will not think clearly when it isn't. Earl Brennan still answers his own phone. He still drives the same truck. He has never taken a vacation longer than 4 days. And somewhere in a brokerage account in Pennsylvania, his quiet little fortune keeps compounding, while the franchise owners who laughed at him in 1991 are selling their businesses for less than he's earned in dividends this year. But here's the question that haunts everyone who hears his story. If staying small built $4 million, what happens when someone applies the exact same discipline to a business that actually does scale, and how much further could it go?